Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another Ask Professor Paranormal. That's me, Lloyd Auerbach, parapsychologist. Welcome. I see a couple people here who I have seen before and I know fairly well at this point, and a couple new people too, so definitely welcome. As those of you who've been to these sessions before It's really an opportunity for you to ask questions or talk about experiences and get my take on them, on different topics you can raise and all that. And I'll do endeavor to address them. But I also have some other things I can talk about or will talk about if it's a little quiet, a little light on questions tonight. So I'll start out as I usually do, just to mention in mentioning the couple of classes that I'll be teaching and co-teaching starting tomorrow, actually, Monday, October 7th. I will be teaching in the evenings a course called Sci in the Movies, TV, and Literature. Think of it as pop culture, sort of pop culture and the paranormal. That course is a 4-week class. It's not graded. It's just for fun, but it hopefully will provide some good fodder for discussion as it has in the past, and also let people kind of get a concept beyond the horror films that do seem to impact people quite a bit. So I don't focus so much on horror as much. Isela, great, welcome. Glad you made it. And that's starting. It's a 4-week class starting tomorrow. On Tuesday night, I'll be co-teaching a class with John Kruth, who is both the executive director and research director at the Rhine Research Center. And that course is Ethics in Investigations. So it's really for folks who do or want to do paranormal investigations, ghost hunting, to understand the need and what it means to be ethical and how you treat your clients, your cases, all of that. That is a 6-week class. John usually teaches the first 3, kind of also giving kind of a background on how ethics kind of works in research in general. And then I then focus on scenario situations in investigations. Both of those classes, the pop culture class, which is again Sci in the Movies, TV, and Literature, that one and the ethics class are both online courses. They are offered live, which is a great time if you can make it to watch the lecture, and then we have a discussion period with the students afterwards. If you can't make it, classes are all recorded, and students can still participate in online discussion forums with myself and other students. So if you go to, and in the channel description, there is the link to the Rhine Education Center. It just simply, I'm just putting it in the chat right now. And you'll see the descriptions on that first page, along with a couple other interesting classes that are offered for the Rhine Center. So these are our classes. I am teaching one more starting in November, which will be a class on people in the paranormal, basically parapsychologists who have had a serious impact over the last century and almost century and a half on investigations and fieldwork, as well as on research in general. Hi, Lydia. I'm familiar with your stories of Lois, Morse Speech Distillery, USS Hornet. Any other cases of conscious apparitions you think have a lot of evidence? I've had other cases that certainly, one of them is a case of the Banta Inn, which is a restaurant bar in Tracy, California, about an hour and a half east of San Francisco. That was one I actually did before the distillery or the Hornet. And it is written up in my book, A Paranormal Casebook, which is available. That was, there actually were there were really two conscious entities there, but one was the main guy that we dealt with. And he was a man named Tony Gukin. He had been the bartender manager of the restaurant bar for a number of years. His wife had been related to the original owners, and there may be a relationship with his wife's family to the famous outlaw Joaquin Murrieta here in the Bay Area, the greater Bay Area. So Tony he died in 1968, and he died fairly quickly, apparently behind the bar. Now, we did have one family member later on challenge that, but everyone who knew him, and actually people who were actually there when he had a heart attack, explained that he had died pretty quickly. And shortly after his death, the regulars were seeing him in his usual corner, which is where he sat in the bar, in the cocktail area, during his breaks. They'd see him walking around, And then people walking through the bar area to go to the restaurant would comment on him as they did when he was alive, whether they knew him or not. And it was kind of an interesting apparitional encounter for a lot of people, even though most of them didn't even know he was a ghost. A few years later, when someone who knew Tony as she was growing up bought the place, Joan Borland and her husband Dave. Dave was a cop actually, and skeptical. Tony was being seen by people still, and then started moving things around. And at one point, Dave actually created a mug book so that people who had never seen Tony before, he would have them identify the ghost that they saw from the mug book. It was a picture of Tony and a bunch of his friends of the same vintage, so to speak. And they all identified the same guy. My first visit there was actually for a TV show called Hard Copy, and Tony was pretty active physically. So there was physical activity there at 11 o'clock in the morning. He was most active when people were in the bar and in the restaurant. And we, over the years, a few years after, we talked to a lot of people, including some physicists from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, who witnessed activity. One of whom responded to me when I asked him what he thought of it was, "I think I have to rethink physics." So really cool, interactive, really interactive in so many ways for that. Lydia, I'm glad you're going to look forward to reading it. I had a lot of people recently ask me for an audiobook, so I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do there. But I will be working on a second volume for next year. So it's this is a second edition of a Paranormal Casebook. There will be a second volume down the road. All right. Are you familiar with Carrie the Mortician podcast? No, I'm not. Talks about the paranormal experience in funeral homes. Yeah, I mean, I could see possibly a funeral home, especially if people are still attached more or less to the families and the bodies and stuff like that. But cemeteries and funeral homes are rarely ever haunted by conscious entities. Now, haunted by residual stuff is not unexpected, but most of that's going to be emotional more than anything else. And it's emotions coming from the mourners, not from the people who died. In fact, most of the stuff in cemeteries is coming from the living. In fact, most hauntings are coming from the living, not from the dead in any way, shape, or form. So I'll have to look that one up. You know, I've known people who worked in funeral homes, and they had almost no stories at all, except that there was somebody I talked to who was a mortician. They went to pick up the body to take to the funeral home, and she said, if I can remember this correctly, she said that the guy was standing over his body waiting, and once they took the body out of the room, he disappeared. That was it. So I guess he was just kind of watching over his body to make sure that somebody took care of it in some way. We sometimes hear things like that for the most part. All right, so I've talked about the two classes. I will say something about the pop culture class a little bit more. It really covers more probably movies and TV shows, many things that you might not be aware kind of connect to ghosts and things like that. Of course, we have a lot of good examples today on the air and on streaming, but I'll be talking about kind of the history of ghosts and psychics and mediums and all psychic abilities and consciousness in the history of pop culture. And I'll be talking about old movies and newer movies and TV shows that you probably have completely forgotten, some of which are still available on YouTube. And also talking about comic books a little bit and science fiction books. I'm going to stay away from horror for a number of reasons. I'll talk about a few key horror films. In fact, I had a really interesting conversation with a buddy of mine the other day about this. So I will throw out 3 movies that he mentioned, I thought, which didn't have as much of an impact on the public, certainly as a movie like The Exorcist. One was the 1963 film, The Haunting. And if you have not seen that, it's a black and white film. It has almost no special effects, a lot of mood music, really interesting camera angles. It's one of the best films, spooky films out there. And it's based on the story, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. That was directed by Robert Wise. Excellent film. Another one was a film, and it was the early 70s, called The Legend of Hell House by Richard Matheson, based on his book Hell House, which was an homage to The Haunting of Hill House. And it's a really excellent film. Matheson wrote the screenplay as well. Richard Matheson happens to have been, I'll pull something out here, one of the best horror, science fiction, and thriller writers, I think, of the past century. He wrote about a third of the Twilight Zone episodes, the originals. He wrote a number of dramatic and scary movies as well. He wrote the screenplay for the original Kolchak film, The Night Stalker, and its sequel, The Night Strangler. And he also, according to my buddy Barry Taff, who knew him very well, had one of the best libraries on parapsychology and psychic phenomena, the paranormal and mysteries of anybody. Years ago, I was fortunate to get a numbered signed edition of this book, Mediums Rare, which is about the history of mediumship. And it's available as a Kindle book. It might be available in paperback too from Amazon. So I was really happy to get this. And the other one, Graveyard Grog, you beat me to it, was The Changeling with George C. Scott. One of the best seance scenes in any movie. So those three movies, I think, are absolutely. But if you're interested in reading, Richard Matheson's books are amazing. He wrote a couple of movies that or books that were spurred movies that you might not think were from a guy who did horror. And one was called What Dreams May Come. That became a movie about the afterlife with Robin Williams and Cuba Gooding Jr. He also wrote Somewhere in Time, a nice time travel romance with Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. He wrote a book called Stir of Echoes. If you can certainly find that book, there was a movie based on it, a really good movie. It's actually one of my favorites, in fact, that came out about 2 weeks after The Sixth Sense with Bruce Willis. And because of the popularity of that film, Stir of Echoes got no love. It's a great movie. It stars Kevin Bacon. The book is better than the movie, but the movie is good. So those are all good things to play with. And, I think and I'm going to mention one other thing now, and I'll mention again later. My next session, you'll see on the page here, the channel, will in fact be 3 weeks from tonight, not 2 weeks. And then I'll be 2 weeks, every 2 weeks through the end of the year. I have to skip a week because of a Forever Family Foundation event, and being president, I kind of have to be there. So I think it's the 26th of October, whatever that Sunday is, I believe it's the 26th, will be the next show, and it will be kind of a Halloween special. So we'll talk pop culture, Halloween, and all sorts of fun stuff at that point. All right. I do recommend this book, Mediums Rare by Matheson. It's not a tough read. But it really kind of gives you an idea of the history of spiritualism and mediumship. All right. Lydia, I always thought mediums were pure fraud, but the Windbridge study, as well as some other studies in your stories, maybe think there's actually might be something there. And I'm glad you raised that, because I kind of responded to a skeptic on a website or on a Facebook page I think it was called Let's Talk Paranormal, where he was chastising people for believing in mediums and that they're all frauds, and that some of them that they take advantage of people in grief. And the fact is that there are frauds. There are fraudulent psychics. There are fraudulent fortune tellers. There are fraudulent mediums. There are fraudulent doctors. There are fraudulent lawyers. There are fraudulent, or let's say less than honest, contractors, plumbers, every single profession you can think of. There are people who call themselves parapsychologists who are frauds. Every single profession you can think of has frauds. So the thing is, and what we have to do, even with investigations, is cut through any potential fraud and any mistakes people make. I have been friends with several skeptics over the years, one of whom years ago, he's passed away, but one of whom in particular, a man named Bob Steiner, who went on to become president of the Society of American Magicians. He's the founder of the Bay Area Skeptics. And Bob got to know a number of psychics and mediums in the Bay Area and came to the conclusion that while they may not be psychic or mediums, they firmly believed they were. In other words, they were sincere. And several of the ones he met were not taking, he did not consider them taking advantage of people. Bob and I had long conversations about this. The person who was kind of taking a task on the Facebook page mentioned the fact that people like Darren Brown and other mentalists can do readings and make and convince people that they're psychic. And Bob did the same thing. Absolutely true. No question about it. There is no question about it. But the question is, does that mean that there are not any real psychics or mediums? And the answer to that is, well, is a response I usually give was, if duplicating something indicates it's not real, then there's nothing real in the world anymore, because CGI can do everything. And even before CGI, in a theater, they could make an explosion happen. In movies, they blew things up, and very often those things really didn't blow up. Actors pretend to be someone they're not. Is that fraud or entertainment? So it's really about the purpose in many respects. And duplicating something with magic, with special effects, does not mean that the thing does not exist. It just means that you have to discern the truth from fiction, rather. What is entertainment? What is a scam, trying to take advantage of you? There are more scams out there because of the internet now than there ever have been. It really boils down to understanding how to analyze or kind of take apart a reading. Sometime in the spring, I'll be teaching my class again on how to choose a psychic and understand, assess a reading or assess the psychic. There are books out there by psychics on how to do that, how to really understand. But let me just kind of back up and say that what Lydia mentioned, the work of the Windbridge, especially the Windbridge Research Center, Julie Beischel has kind of worked with a number of mediums, whittled them down to 20. They're actually down to 19 now, because one has left the mediumship world, and put them through more and more controlled studies and tests. So she has 19 research mediums who are good in a research condition. And the conditions are multi-blinded. In other words, the medium is only given a first name. That's it. There's no sitter on the other end of the line. There's nobody to give feedback. There is no feedback during the reading. And then that reading is analyzed. In addition to that kind of qualitative study and looking at the number of statements that might be true, there have been brain studies looking at what's going on with their brainwave pattern, and also deeper in the brain when a medium is having a conversation with someone, when they're pretending to talk to some deceased person, and when they claim to be talking to a spirit. And there are different brain states happening. That would not happen with a con artist. Right? While there is an ethical issue that is important to consider, most mediums don't try to take you for thousands of dollars. Good mediums or real medium, if a medium, there's a couple things. If a medium or psychic for that matter tells you you've been cursed, get up and walk, just leave. That's number one. That's just simple common sense. If a medium wants you to come back every week, there's a problem there. All right. The better mediums will tell you that that's just not right. Even once a month is often a lot for many mediums to try to communicate with that same loved one. Unfortunately, there's going to be people who bounce around from medium to medium to medium to psychic to medium. I've met several of them through the Forever Family Foundation, and it doesn't matter what message they get. It doesn't matter how good the medium is. It doesn't matter if the medium's real or fake. There's something going on for them that makes them keep going because they don't hear what they want to hear, or they have guilt around something. And they really need to see a psychologist. And the better mediums will tell them they need counseling right off the bat. Lydia made an appointment with a medium on Very Soul for next week because you're curious. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear about that too. You can tell us in 3 weeks. The thing about it is when you're considering what's happening in the reading, there's 2 levels. If it's a medium, you want to know that they've connected with someone. Do know that it's next to impossible for a medium to guarantee that they can talk to a specific loved one. There's no guarantees. And we see that in the gallery readings and the individual readings with the mediums to the Forever Family Foundation. It's not dial a spirit. That's another thing, another claim that fake, or I don't want to say fake, because they're not all fakes. They are often, many of them are very sincere and think they are having mediumistic experiences, but they don't know any better. They're not knowledgeable about their own abilities and what's possible. You can't just simply dial a spirit. People constantly don't get the person they want to talk to. And it's whoever's available. It's like you make a phone call to a family home, to their landline if they still have one, and it's whoever picks up the phone because nobody else is home. That's important to remember. So that's number 1. Number 2, for any reading you get, are you getting something out of it? Emotionally, psychologically, or otherwise? If you go to see a psychic, is what you get useful information? If I go to, I've had psychics do readings for me to try to work with me from time to time. And great, they give me all sorts of information about myself, my personality, also. That's wonderful. Yeah, that's not useful. Okay? I don't need you to prove you're psychic, except if we go on a situation where we have some unknowns and we can find out whether or not that is confirmed. So useful information, practical information is more important than a psychic proving to a client that they're psychic. That happens very often when people walk in to see a psychic and they clam up. My late friend Annette Martin used to say, and other psychics I know, it's like, tell me why you're here. And of course, people will say, well, you're the psychic, you figure it out. It's like, okay, fine. So I'll do a reading for you, and I may not ever hit why you're here. So maybe you're here because of relationships, but all I'm picking up is job stuff. If you're not here for job stuff, you need to tell me you're not here for job stuff, because they have to focus their attention, their ESP. That's important too. All right. Do you think a person without extrasensory perception can achieve psychic readings? Well, a person without ESP can fake psychic readings, but the very idea of a psychic reading involves extrasensory perception, picking up information, non-local information. You have to have that in order to do an actual, to be called a psychic reading. But imagine if Sherlock Holmes or the guy from the TV show Psych were doing readings for you, doing a reading of you. In the kind of like extended pop culture of Holmes, he could pretty much tell you what part of London you lived in by the mud on your shoes and some lint in your pockets. And sometimes you can get your approximate address. Batman can do that too with some analysis. There's a lot of ways that we can learn enough about people and the generalities about people and even observe people. This is often called cold reading, to provide them with information that is actually factual, but is not outside the bounds of the senses. It's not a psychic thing in that way. And I want to mention, I have seen some, because I am also a mentalist, former magician. I've been in the magic world, magic mentalism world, almost as long as I've been in parapsychology, not quite as long. And I have seen in the Psychic Entertainers Association and had some of the best non-psychic readings. In fact, I want to just say that I've had sometimes better readings from these people who are really good observers than I've had from some psychics who are not terribly psychic. So I would say in that circumstance, the psychic was not as useful or didn't provide me with as much of satisfaction as the non-psychic reader. All right, so you have to play with that. The second part of the red letter medium, okay, non-psychic try to do cold readings and obtain good results. Yeah, absolutely. Cold reading, my buddy Bob Steiner didn't even try to do difficult cold readings. He didn't even do a lot of observation. He had a couple stock readings and he delivered them as a good actor would to people, and they just bought into it. So the reality is there's plenty of literature in the magic and mentalism world on doing a good cold reading. There are even books for the general public on that you can find. There's certainly websites that tell you all about it, but it's really names, dates, places, specifics, personality stuff that doesn't come from the cold reading. That's what's important. All right. But again, you can get a good reading from a non-psychic too. Hopefully when I call them a non-psychic, I'm not talking about somebody who is a fraud in the sense that they are trying to take advantage of you. Most folks who are non-psychics doing readings will do them in New Age stores or psychic fairs. They might charge, $50 to $100. They're going to be on the low end of charges because if they have any ethics whatsoever, or they're just going to tell you this is for entertainment only, something like that. Okay, Jody. After a family member recently died, a friend who claims to be sensitive and unsolicited from me, he's feeling lost. Oh my God. Let me tell you about a good friend of mine who herself, she is a psychic and medium. Her name is Ankasha Amenti. And I got to know her here in the Bay Area before she moved first to Minnesota and then to up to the Seattle area. And Ankasha had a daughter who was in her 20s, who I got to know a little bit, who committed suicide, which was devastating to her and her husband. She wrote a book. I'm trying to remember the title of the book here off the top of my head. I'll have to get this later because I don't always remember the title of. Let's see if I can spot it up for a second up here. I'm gonna have to grab it later. Anyway, after Amber died, and this is no secret, after Amber passed away, there was, there were posts on her Facebook page. People had their condolences. She got unsolicited messages from people saying, I'm a medium. I'm in contact with Amber. She sends her love. She's okay. And after a number of these messages, Ankasha got angry. And I don't blame her. She started blocking people, which was good. Number one, because if Amber was going to come through to anybody, it was going to be somebody Ankasha actually knew, or to her directly, which did happen. And these people seem to think that they're helping you by giving you these unsolicited messages. And a message of he's feeling lost is not helpful. Not helpful at all. And the people who call themselves sensitives, I think there's still an issue that happens with the Forever Family Foundation. Fran Ginsburg, who was the executive director until she passed away a couple of years ago, used to kind of rant, blow off steam, I should say, really. She blew off steam. The foundation does certification of mediums, but through testing. And for a number of years, now it's virtual. For a number of years before the pandemic, it was going to be in person, and people would call up asking to be tested. They'd speak to Fran, and she'd start asking them questions. I'm a medium. I want to be tested so I can be certified. And Fran would start asking questions. Well, in general, they had a single experience seeing an apparition or having a message from the deceased. So an after-death communication once. To them, that meant that they must be mediums. But those kinds of things happen to everybody who is open to it. It has nothing to do with being a medium. Medium is somebody who can control and connect. And these people are not mediums. So when somebody claims to be a sensitive, you know, I think, I'm glad you said to tell her to F off. I think that that's appropriate. This is where the ethics of being a practitioner come in, and that was highly unethical. Let's see. How would I respond? Yeah. Okay. So I think that um, Jody. Yeah. I think really just it's not, if this keeps happening, if this person keeps trying to contact you, or if that's a friend, tell them that it's inappropriate and they should learn to use their abilities and how to use them before they start calling people unsolicited like that. Okay, Paul, you've read Julie Beisel's book. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, Julie has a couple of books out there, really good to read. Yeah, Jody, it's just ridiculous. I would have, when this, I know that Ankasha tried to block these people after trying to explain to them, but let's see. Tina, hi Tina. Do experiments assessing mediums also concurrently assess the brain-body measurements of the sitter and client? I don't believe so. I don't know that there has been that kind of. I have to look into that and see if there's that. Part of it is it's not like most folks in the field have access to enough technology to be able to doing that at the same time. But that would be really interesting, especially the brainwave thing. It would be interesting to see if there's any sort of in sync kind of thing happening there. Beyond the power of deduction, do you think we all have a certain degree extrasensory sensitivity? Absolutely. There's no question. I mean, this is something that J.B. Ryan and the Duke Parapsychology Lab established, that psi ESP is kind of distributed throughout the population, kind of on a bell curve, like anything else that we humans experience. It is also the case that people tend to be more psychic as kids, and we are, depending on culture and its effect on us, education, family, religion, all of those things suppress, dampen down, tell us they're not real. The skeptics tell us it's not real, or that you're weird. I've had friends who learned, who realized that they were psychic when they were in school, elementary school, which wasn't a problem, but high school was a problem for them, because as soon as they started, saying things or stuff was coming spontaneously, sometimes they, of course, were the weird kid. So there are societal effects on that too. And for some people, it suppresses things completely. So you'd have to relearn how to be psychic and open up afterwards, after that, which is something people can do. There are plenty of ways to do it. Just if you're going to follow the plan from a psychic development book, make sure it's a book that talks about various ways that it fits individuals, because so many of the books by psychics on how to be psychic talk really from their own personal experience of how they became or recognized they were psychic. And we're all different. Peter Hurkos was a famous psychic in the 50s and 60s. He fell off a ladder and hit his head and found he was psychic afterwards. Others have had near-death experiences. I wouldn't recommend either one of those purposely to try to become psychic. But I've seen books by people who talk about trauma, that they have to have trauma. So why in the world would you want to do that? But there's plenty of ways that you can kind of be aware that we're all scanning the environment anyway psychically. It's just that our normal senses, they're louder. They kind of pick things up better. ESP, you have to kind of attend to it, pay attention in many respects. Okay. And Jody, I'm glad it's a former friend. That's good. I'm honestly always suspicious when people tell me that they're a sensitive, with quotes around it. If they said that they were developing their psychic abilities as part of that, I understand that. But I've met several people who claim to be sensitives, and one in particular, when I asked some questions, practically broke out crying because she was emotionally sensitive. There are people who are sensitive in other ways, and sometimes they think they're psychic, and you got to be careful about that as well. All right. So one of the things I want to mention is that part of what we cover in the ethics class, even though there's that whole section, the second half of the course is me talking about ethics for investigators. I also talk about ethics not only in working with psychics and mediums, but also how the psychics and mediums work with clients in investigations, and also just generally um, the ethical, I think, demands that psychics should have. And there are some psychics who are really looking at that. There are a lot of very ethical people, but there also are very unethical psychics. I can think of one who's passed away, who was always on the Montel Williams show. And as far as I'm concerned, she never on the shows demonstrated anything psychic. And from people I know who went to see her and other issues that came up with her, her ethics were not the best. Let's put it, were maybe not even there at all. So, there are people who may be genuinely talented who I would say stay away from because they're unethical as well. I will also say that just because a psychic or medium charges a lot of money, first of all, they have to be good. So they have to be legitimate. But a lot of that comes from, and it's kind of sorry, it really is. I know because I've talked to some of the mediums who are now so famous, they have to charge a lot of money because otherwise they wouldn't even have downtime. But the better ones still will take a particular situation with someone who can't afford it and help them out in some way. That's a good ethical practice as well, kind of a sliding scale thing in that way. But think about this when it comes to therapists, when it comes to surgeons, when it comes to lawyers. The more experience you have, the more you tend to charge for that, for whatever it is you're doing. And that's because you need to make a living. And I've gotten into arguments with some people because I've seen them argue with a psychic who is a good psychic. This happened with Annette a couple of times. How dare you charge money for your readings? It's a gift from, you're charging for a gift. It's like her response, which was entirely proper, is, got to feed my family. Or are you going to be a starving artist? Giving something away for free. First of all, there are people who don't actually value free. And then there are those people who, they just try to take advantage of you at every turn. The reality is that these are people, if their job is to be a psychic or medium, then they need to make a living. And if you would begrudge them making a living because they are gifted, well, look how much it costs to go to a Taylor Swift concert. She's gifted as a singer. How much does that cost? Any concert, anywhere, costs a bloody fortune these days. So, just consider these are human beings as well for this. Okay, let's see. I think I don't see any more questions right now. So I think I thought I'd just talk briefly about something I tweeted about. I tweeted or posted it somewhere to kind of promote this this particular session of Ask Professor Paranormal. And that really, I've done recently. I did a Paracon. I think I talked about this last time up in what's considered the Gold Country here outside of Sacramento and San Francisco Bay Area. And I've been around ghost hunters. I did the Oregon Ghost Conference back in March. I don't really do a lot of the Paracons. Most of the time, they tend to be celebrity paranormal investigator folks who, so it's like a fan convention. Jody, skills are worth money as long as you are ethical. That's absolutely right. So many people I know think I should provide editing and research skills for free because they know you. Right. Exactly. My good friends sometimes ask me to perform at parties, and I'll do that for them because I have fun with them because they're my friends. But otherwise, yeah, I don't do my performances for free. It really is you got to make a living. That's what it boils down to in general. So in this tweet, I talked about the kind of basics that ghost hunters need to know, paranormal investigators need to know. I thought I just want to talk about a few things. I have given a presentation did it at the Paracon in Gold Country, at the session in Oregon as well. And I called it "Do Ghosts Have ESP?" and other questions parapsychologists can answer, but reality TV cannot. And really, there's foundational stuff that somebody who wants to do an investigation really needs to know. The first thing everybody needs to know is that if you're doing investigations of apparitions, hauntings, poltergeists, you need to know something about parapsychology. It's not just a laboratory science. We've been doing field work since before the beginnings of the field in 1882. And we've learned stuff. And the laboratory stuff is often based on things that we learn in the field, and then their findings give support to things we do in the field and in investigations. ESP, extrasensory perceptions, involved in any psychic doing anything, any medium. A medium who communicates with a spirit is doing so by ESP. A person who sees a ghost is doing that with their ESP, not with their eyes. If a ghost moves something, it's still mind over matter. It's still psychokinesis. And poltergeist cases are all psychokinesis from the living. So you got to know something about parapsychology. And then there's the folklore that's there. And I'm going to kind of give you a quick rundown of a few pieces of folklore that the reality shows have promoted heavily and continue to pervade the paranormal community, ghost hunters and everything else. So number one, ghosts are mainly found in the dark, which means you have to do your investigations late at night around 2 or 3 in the morning when it's quiet. Well, the idea of doing 2 or 3 in the morning when it's quiet, that comes from William Roll, who pointed that out. I think that the TV show Paranormal State promoted that as dead time. At that time of night, the world around the house is quiet. The environment, physical environment outside, no traffic, people talking outside, that's it. It has nothing to do with the paranormal. Unless that's the time that the witnesses have actually had experiences, which is really, really rare. It's very rare for someone to be woken up by an apparition or haunting. Most experiences over the last 140 years happen during the day, in the wee hours, as Tina's putting there, of the morning, maybe before dawn, or maybe after dark. But they happen with the lights on, typically. So, yeah, you could do it at 2 in the morning, but you do not need to do it in the dark. There's nothing about darkness that connects to apparitions, or hauntings for that matter. Nothing specific. Nothing at all. All right, that's number one. Number two, one of the reasons it's done in the dark is so the ghosts can manifest themselves. It's a lot easier for them to manifest themselves. That's not what's happening. That's a term from spiritualism, where it was thought that they had to pull matter, the ectoplasm, together to make themselves seen and heard. But we know, and I say no, that seeing an apparition is not happening with your eyes. Hearing an apparition is not happening with your ears. It's all extrasensory. It's non-sensory perception. So there's no manifestation happening. There's an experience happening and a connection happening. Of course, along with that, we hear that there are cold spots because ghosts need the heat to be able to manifest. There are very, very, very few cases where people have felt a cold spot, that the spot is actually physically cold. You can measure that with thermometers. People feel cold, which is a psychological response. But in fact, I know of one case where the temperature went up. So that kind of, when the apparition was appearing to a medium and to someone else in the place as well. So go figure with that. All right, let's see here. Have you seen the Afterlife Files documentary on that? I've seen a bunch of documentaries. I don't know if I've seen one called the Afterlife Files. I'm Not quite sure. You have to tell me what that one's about, Paul. All right, another piece of folklore. Technology can detect ghosts. No, it cannot. Ghosts might be able to affect the technology, but we have to know that there's a ghost present, an apparition present, which requires a human agent to be able to perceive or detect the ghost. So the more tech is not the better, unless you want to flip it around and say that the technology, the more tech that is used to determine what's happening in the environment when people are having an experience and when they're not, provides us data that is good, if not better. So in that case, the more tech, the better. Yes, for that. And then the thing that the TV shows have made so evident, or so prominent, I should say, is that technology is more important than people's experiences. And Ghost Hunters, for example, the show with Jason and Grant, would dismiss people's experiences as anecdotal evidence, but they had an experience and that was fine. So all social science is built on anecdotal experience and anecdotal evidence. All of it. Psychology, sociology, anthropology. No anecdotal evidence, no anecdotal experiences, no personal experiences. We don't have ghosts. How do you know a house is haunted? You got to have somebody who experiences it. That's important with that. So I personally do not do investigations unless there are people for me to talk to who've had experiences. I don't see the point. It's not about the tech. I mean, if somebody said, "Oh, you're going to have an experience," it's like, okay, maybe I'll go in as a tourist, but I'm not. There's not really anything to investigate. There's no ghost story. You need a ghost story. That means somebody has to have an experience for that. Okay, Paul, they interview mediums to talk to people who had NDEs and claim to see. I don't think I've seen that one, Paul. I'll have to look that one up. That doesn't sound familiar to me. Okay, a good EVP is proof of the presence of spirits. Well, it might be evidence, but we have no proof. We don't even have proof of consciousness because we can't even define it in science. It's the hard problem of science. What is consciousness? So science is not about proof, although we talk about proving something. Mathematics is about proof, geometry especially. But we're talking about a preponderance of evidence, having enough evidence to support something. And a single EVP is not even necessary. It's maybe good evidence if it fits with what people are experiencing and the circumstances. But if you have to make the response fit a question that you did or did not ask, it doesn't have to be from a spirit. In fact, it never has to be from a spirit. It could easily be from you, the operator, because in order for that EVP to be related to a spirit, that spirit has to use psychokinesis, mind over matter, to affect the device or recording medium. But we know living people can affect devices better than we know ghosts can. So a single EVP is part of some potential evidence, but it needs to connect to all the other evidence. All right, Paul, speaking of EVP, NDEs, it bothers me that when people, especially celebrities like Al Pacino, who said he died, don't remember anything. Yeah, it doesn't disprove an afterlife. It just means they didn't have an experience for whatever reason, you know? And actually, what that suggests is that it's not purely human biological. Certainly, that can't be the only thing, because otherwise these people would have had an experience, right? So it sort of disproves, to some extent, the non-afterlife related experiences, for the most part. All right. Mary Prankster, do you think that rituals could awaken energies in places that are not haunted? Intention could do that. It doesn't have to be ritual. A ritual can actually be intention. But it wouldn't be energies. It'd be more like recordings in that way. So they're typically not conscious. It's, it's information in the background. But let me flip that around. That ritual could actually create a haunting. Something that several of us have discussed with all the ghost hunters going in and out of some of these haunted places that are tourist traps in some respects, doing their stuff at night, some of whom were trying to provoke, some of whom were getting really scared. They're leaving stuff behind that other subsequent ghost hunting groups will pick up on. So the haunting will be caused by the ghost hunters themselves in that way. And a ritual could actually do that pretty easily. All right. Let's see here. Another piece here. Places where tragedy struck are good places to find ghosts. They might be good places to find a haunting, a residual haunting. Any place with significant emotional impact that happens, an event happens, something like that happens, that can leave a psychic stain on the place. But also places with positive vibes, something very positive happened, could also be haunting the place too. But as far as apparitions, it doesn't seem to be the case. Now, sometimes people who die traumatically are in denial that they're dead. Maybe they're possessive of their spot. It doesn't have to be tragedy. There's other reasons why that can happen. That seems to happen, but it's pretty rare for ghosts to stick around. I mean, think about this: if you were violently killed, would you want to stick around where you were killed, unless that was your normal place to live? Your home. It just doesn't make any sense. All right. Keep seeing ghost hunters saying things like flowing water, electrical storms, even limestone. Okay, so first of all, we have in our field, thanks to some initial work done by Michael Persinger and then a number of others, there are correlations between the local geomagnetic field, the Earth's magnetic field, and people's psychic experiences, paranormal experiences, psychic experiences, and otherwise. And there are a number of things that can affect the local geomagnetic field. Earth movement can do that. Water flow, so underground water. Yes, electrical storms can affect the local geomagnetic field. Phases of the moon can affect the local geomagnetic field. It's actually possible to get the data from the USGS and other organizations around the world. And what we've seen is people report more or less certain types of experiences during highs and lows or shifts of the Earth's magnetic field. So there is that connection. There's something called the stone tape theory, which comes out of England, which is that buildings that have ferrous materials, so iron in the materials, seem to be more conducive to hauntings, and limestone's another one I've heard. There hasn't been enough study to see number one, we don't even have the funding at all to see what it is in the environment that could hold information, let alone how the information gets imprinted. But we do know the electromagnetism holds information. I mean, that's what almost all of our computers are working off of. If you have an old videotape, that was all magnetic tape. It is electromagnetic in nature, and so it's possible that the information's in the electromagnetic field around us. We just don't know. Honestly, we just don't know. We don't have the data to confirm that. We just have this other data from the Earth's magnetic field in general. But there are some correlations between residual hauntings and EMF, electromagnetic fields of other types. And that's why ghost hunters started using EMF meters, because some of us were trying to use electromagnetic field sensors to see if those correlations were there. No correlations with apparitions, by the way, directly that have been found. Nothing consistent at all. But it is likely when it comes to hauntings, not necessarily apparitions, but hauntings, it is likely there's something environmental, a connection between the environment and those of us who are picking up the haunting, in other words, our brains, that allow us to perceive that information. So it's hard to say what it is. We need much more environmental data. Again, that's why we started using technology at all. It would be great if ghost hunters started focusing on experience, non-experience, environment. What's going on in those circumstances? If residual hauntings are essentially a loop, is there any point in investigating? Sure. First of all, it provides us with data, and secondly, it provides resolution and understanding for the people who are experiencing them. I mean, people call, maybe not the people who follow the TV shows, but we investigate hauntings in private residences or other places where people are either want an explanation or want to know what's going on. Is this an entity or not? That's another reason it's kind of hard to know that there is a loop unless you really look at what's being reported. And most people who report these things don't look at how these things are on a loop in that sense. Let me hit one more piece of folklore, which is absolute folklore. Ghosts are often evil or demonic. That comes from religion. That does not come from any observations. That would be like first the logical point for that would be to step back and say people are often evil or demonic. Now, I don't think people are demonic. There are people who do evil things. There are bullies out there. Interestingly enough, in general, we don't find a lot of experiences related to people who were evil or bad in life sticking around after death. I think that's kind of interesting in itself. And the idea that shadows, somebody sees a black shape, are evil or demonic, there's 2 points for this. You know, there may be experiences of so-called shadow people that don't fit into the ghostly world. But I will say that there have been experiences reported, including reported to me, where there were a couple of witnesses, and one witness saw a shadow and freaked out, and the other witness is clearly seeing an apparition in the spot where the person is seeing the shadow. And what that tells me is that that person who is seeing the shadow is simply not processing the signal right. Their ESP is not getting the full picture. The other person is getting the full picture. So for whatever reason, their brain turns it into shadow. That's number one. Number two, calling them demonic because they're dark is a real stereotype, honestly. You know, it's a little crazy that a dark spot, which may represent something else, just sitting there is evil or demonic, indicates that. Could be somebody else. I mean, what if you saw something really, really bright that burned your eyes? Would you say that was angelic? Because it's more harmful than that dark spot that's there. And last thing I'll just point out is it is not a scientific approach if you have a demonologist on your team, especially a demonologist who has no religious training whatsoever. That's ridiculous. Because demons are, if they exist, which I don't personally believe, would be magic. And not the kind of magic I am a magician for. All right, we only have a minute or two left here. Just a reminder, we're going to be going 3 weeks now. So the next one will be in 3 weeks, skipping an extra week. Reminder that to go to the Rhine Education Center website, rhineedu.org. That is, if you scroll back through the comments, you'll see that also listed on the channel. And it is, we have our new courses starting. My course on pop culture starts tomorrow night. Fun course. Love talking about movies and TV and stuff like that, and ghosts and psychics. And then we're doing an ethics class for investigators on Tuesday, and there are other classes the Rhine offers as well. I'll have to kind of table the Marian apparition for another time at this point. But I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. And just remember to not be afraid of no ghosts, or any ghosts, I should really say. That's really such a double negative there, isn't it? So hopefully you can join me next time. We'll play Halloween a little bit for that. Maybe I'll even dress up. I'll think about it. So come and well, if I saw you, I'd say come in costume. We'll see what happens. Anyway, feel free to. My email is in the channel description. You can always send me questions in advance to remind me for next time. And I want to thank everybody for coming. And have a great couple of weeks. And happy Spooktober. Good night.